Andy, welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast ahead of Scotland this weekend. I wouldn't quite say it's a must-win game. Well, maybe it is, in the eyes of the IRFU anyway, pressure on Andy Farrell and the coaching team. But I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it with Donal Lenihan, Bernard Jackman and Wes Liddy. Donal, look, I don't think it's quite must-win territory yet, but it's a very important game in the context that Ireland went out the last time. They looked pretty good against an average enough Italy side. They scored some very nice tries. But this weekend's opposition is a different test altogether. And it'll be interesting to see how Ireland cope.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be a fascinating game in many ways. I think it is a really important game. We bounced back against Italy, as you said, showed a lot of good signs. But Italy, 18 penalties, 2 yellow cards. You know, people are talking about England's indiscipline, averaging 14 penalties a game. Italy are even so far ahead of that. But look, you got to take the positives from Italy, but they only matter if you perform against Scotland. In many respects, the clock has been wound back to December. If you remember, we ended up playing Scotland in that kind of third, fourth playoff for the Autumn Nations Cup. There was a lot of pressure on Ireland going into that game, and Ireland played really well. They responded. They played good attacking rugby that day as well. Scotland, as is their wont, kind of flattered to deceive. But this is going to be a different test in that, we heard Paul O'Connell talking yesterday about the best Scottish side that, he has seen or maybe have come up against. I'd question that to some degree. If it's the Scotland team that played so well against England, then I think he's absolutely right. But if it's the Scottish team that fell apart from the moment Xander Ferguson got sent off against Wales, where then that sort of mental issues that Scotland have and their capacity to implode and find reasons to explain away defeats, there are doubts surrounding the Scottish team. So that makes it a fascinating game for me.
I think there's a lot of similarities, Bert, between the Irish and the Scots going into games that they're expected to win. And I say that in the context of it never really suits Ireland to go in as these overwhelming favourites, whether it's World Cups or Six Nations Championships or even one-off tests. And Scotland against England, not many people gave them too much of a prayer. They went out, put in a brilliant performance and managed to beat them. The following week against Wales, when we thought, well, sure, they have to back it up now, and they didn't. And I think Paul O'Connell, by saying this is the best Scottish team he's ever faced, is actually being quite cute by sharing them with compliments.
Yeah, look at it. Yeah, I think that we all were massively impressed by Scotland against England. I think now we have to question how good that form is. England were slow to start this competition. Obviously backbone by Saracens players, and they are struggling to get up to the pace of Six Nations. Now I think by round 5 when we play them, they'll be in a lot better shape. But it'll be interesting to see how England do this weekend against France, because there'll be certainly a lot of areas of concern for Eddie Jones from their performances against Wales and Scotland. I do think Scotland are a better side than they have been for the last 3 or 4 years, just because they seem to be a little bit more pragmatic. They've got a better set piece, better defence, and they still have very talented individuals like Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg, who have the capacity to change a game, but also the capacity to lose a game as well. And I think that's what Ireland will be looking at, I think it'll be a boring enough style of game plan, but looking to basically beat them up, put a squeeze on them, play the percentages and make Scotland overplay and then capitalise on that. And I think a win this weekend without having to hit our straps attacking wise will probably be more important for the team and Andy Farrell than going out there and trying to play, a very expansive style of rugby when we're not maybe ready to play it yet and potentially losing. Because I think if you lose it, it just makes the England game, incredibly important and pressurised when it shouldn't need to be.
That's pretty depressing, isn't it? That we are going out to play Scotland and we're going to have to keep it tight to win because we're not quite ready to play an attacking brand of rugby. That's pretty absolutely dour. Think about that. Scotland, Wales.
Yeah, it's probably a sign of how we've slipped a little bit that we're talking about it on an even footing. We probably haven't dealt with Scotland too often in the last 20 years, but there's 2 games left, and in the context of this whole project under Andy Farrell, there's probably 3 outcomes. There's you win both games, and on the back of having beaten Italy, you're very much on an upward curve. Everything's positive. You're moving forward. you win one game, you're probably in the same position you entered the season, where there's, some hope but some uncertainty, and the disastrous situation is you lose both, and in which case there is real pressure there. So it is getting close to the realm of a must-win game, I think. And I suppose we all thought maybe the Italy game would turn the corner in terms of that style, but maybe like there was such a contrast between the way they played there and the way they played against France in terms of their attacking approach that maybe it is a horses for courses approach they're taking, and maybe that will facilitate them becoming a bit more conservative against Scotland again.
I think in the context, Donal, of the Italy match, it's a bit like, maybe the senior squad training with the 20s during the Six Nations weekend and looking really good, but actually, they're not as good as perhaps they might have shown against the Italians. This thought that we're going to have to play it tight against Scotland. Do you agree with that, first of all? And if so, how do you feel about that, given it's Scotland? And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the Scots.
Yeah, look, I'd hate to see us take 2 steps back again from the way that we played against Italy. I mean, I think when we held on to the ball, when we created opportunities for the likes of Keegan coming in, he showed, the quality he has as an attacking fullback. I think we have the capacity to stress defences more than we're doing by continually kicking the ball away. And I suppose an interesting selection from that perspective, and maybe the one that'll tell us most, is who starts at scrum-half. I mean, Gibson Park, I think he's done well in the games that he's played, and he definitely picks up the tempo of the game in terms of he taps and go off penalties. He tends to move the ball, and you play from the first or second receiver after him. If Conor Murray comes back in, well, then you would think perhaps we're going back to playing more of a kicking game. So that's going to be instructive for me. But I think we have, we have seen that Henshaw and Ringrose can create issues for any midfield that they come up against. And if you can play off them, I think there are opportunities there for that back three. And I also look at the Scottish team. I mean, I had a quick run there again at the Scottish team before we came on. I mean, you look at their forwards. I mean, they did brilliantly against England, but Hamish Watson, for me, outstanding at 7, a contender to go on the Lions tour. Matt Fagerson or Blade Thompson in the back row. I mean, who would you take given what we have? A front row like the Turner at hooker, WP Nell is probably a prop. I mean, I wouldn't be overly concerned about, taking them on. And that's where in previous years, I think the difficulty and the challenge for Farrell is, like, we've beaten Scotland 9 times out of 10 when we've played them over the past decade. And we've done that by stressing them up front, by bullying them up front, by controlling possession, retaining the ball through multiple phase rugby and stressing them. I think we can still do that with the pack we have, but I think we could add more balance to our game. And that is what I want to see. Like, we're either all duck and no dinner, or we're the other way. Do you know what I mean? It's a question of better balance to our game. And that is something that evolves as the game progresses. And that's what I would like to see, not sticking rigidly to a plan. But, we keep hearing about heads-up rugby and players. Mike Catt only 2 weeks ago came out and put the pressure back on the players by saying, they have to react to what's happening in front of them. And therefore, I think if that is the case, then we should see a more balanced approach.
Does the rationale from keeping it tight, Birch, stem primarily from against Scotland specifically, stem from trying to stop Finn Russell being allowed to do what he is so good at, which is broken field rugby, which is trying to catch teams unaware and basically play it loose and fast, and that's where he's most effective? By keeping it tight, are we essentially trying to negate his best strength?
Yeah, I think we're trying to make him overplay and get frustrated, which he tends to do, to be honest, and throw those wild passes. And the only problem is that the Scottish pack isn't as weak as it was historically. So that's going to be a challenge for Ireland to be able to really put the stranglehold on them. Now, in fairness, our set piece has been very good. Our pack have lots of power and ability, so we should be able to. But they are improving. They certainly are improving as particularly in terms of their set piece, and they've gone away from that free flowing game that Gregor Townsend implemented with Glasgow and tried to implement with Scotland. So, but I do think, they're going to want to try and play territory for sure and get a lead and get Scotland to chase the game, because I think that is what we have to, that is something Scotland have to learn, is the ability to stay patient. And I think with individuals like Finn Russell particularly, he struggled. And he's used to an armchair ride with Racing Metro where his pack are dominant. And the test for him will be in international rugby when they're living off scraps, how patient he can stay.
Mm. Who would you start at hooker, by the way, Birch, before I get Wes's view? Would you pick
I'd start Kelleher. I think
Kelleher.
I think Kelleher is the coming man, and I think the big part of why we looked better in attack against Italy was, our forwards were more dynamic. So you had Kilcoyne, you had Kelleher, you had Tyburn in there with Henderson and James Ryan. You had a lot more ball carriers than we had earlier in the competition. And I would start with Kelleher. And I think the way Paul O'Connell set the line out up now, everybody seems a lot more comfortable. We're thrown to space a lot more. Everything is settled down. When you compare the line out now to what it was like in the Autumn Cup and last year's Six Nations, the hooker was always under pressure to try and hit double tops because we weren't calling good options. We weren't finding space. So I think it's easier now for a hooker. And I think Herring is a better thrower at the moment than Kelleher, but I think Kelleher is a better player around the field. And I think he's going to be the hooker for the World Cup. So I would say get him in now.
Okay. Wes, would you agree with that? And also Connors as well in the back row. I'd like to see him being kept faith with. I think he's got an awful lot of potential. Who would you pick, Kelleher?
I'd definitely pick Kelleher. I think we were talking about this months ago, about this debate about his throwing versus the power he brings. I think we've been crying out for a kind of dynamic hooker. Like, I mean, even watching Super Rugby last weekend, you see what the likes of Cody Taylor and Amua with the Hurricanes are bringing to things, and it'd be great to go somewhere towards matching that. And I agree with Birch. I think the platform was, I think it was the front row carrying particularly, and I'd stick with Dave Kilcoyne over Cian Healy as well. I think he's bringing a bit more energy to things. And I mean, the temptation would be to go with that same pack. Now, it is all prefaced against how poor the opposition were, but I think that pack en masse from the last day has probably earned the right to go again.
Yeah, another area that I'm looking at is Scotland team, Donal, and where they could do damage. And this is, I guess, it's kind of prefaced by saying if Finn Russell gets on top and he gets the ball wide, both Darcy Graham and Duhan van der Merwe are very good wingers. And James Lowe, not to single him out, I guess, but he has been responsible for a couple of key tries let in defensively in terms of reads that he has or hasn't made and tackles that he's fallen off here. If we're not on the ball on the wings, those two lads could do an awful lot of damage for Scotland this weekend.
Yeah, they have. And you throw Stuart Hogg into the middle of it. I mean, he's had an outstanding championship. That is, when I was talking about the Scotland team, and I accept what Birch is saying, they are certainly way stronger up front now than they have been for some time. But it's, their halfbacks in the back three, really. That's where their threat comes from. Van der Merwe, we've seen him for Edinburgh over the past number of years. Now, he looks in contention to go on the Lions. I mean, he's unbelievably strong. He always beats the first man. You also have Maitland also could come into the mix there as well. So, they are incredibly potent in the back three. So therefore, if we are playing that territory game and trying to play in their half of the field, well, then our kicking game has to be absolutely spot on because we know what they'll do. So, I mean, that is a concern. I'm not quite sure, is Cameron Redpath, is he back in the equation yet after injury in the opening game? I thought he was outstanding against England. I think they've lost, they looked as if they'd found a good balance in midfield in that opening game, but Redpath's injury has kind of set them back a little bit there as well. So yeah, look, there's no question that Scottish back three is one of the best in the championship. But going to Ireland, sorry, that's Brian Hickey, the con coach there, looking for more players.
Answer it there, work away.
Go on, put it on the speakerphone for the crack. Give us an insight into the Cork-Con wheeler-dealer type relationship.
Yeah. Doesn't exist. But going back, sorry, to the pack. I mean, I'll go back to prior to the Italy game. I thought that pack had the best balance that I've seen for a while. I was really excited about it. I thought they performed extremely well against Italy, albeit with the reservations that we have made. But, you know, Kelleher is a must at hooker. You know, and I keep going back, fellas like Keith Wood, Jerry Flannery, they all went through issues with throwing early in their career. And, you know, I mean, that's something that hookers have to just work through. So, like, for me, he is that player of the future. He is dynamic with young Sheehan and Leinster, another guy that, you know, could be in the running come the next World Cup. But I just think that balance of what we had starting, I love James Ryan, Henderson and Byrne working in the same pack, giving us all those options line-out wise. And then, I mean, I keep the same bench that we had. I mean, you've the likes of Cian Healy, Andrew Porter, who's had a fantastic season. Ryan Baird, I really hope they keep Ryan Baird on the bench.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're looking at dynamic players, great carriers, people who can beat opposition players. And that's what it's about. If you're forwards, and you're talking about an offloading game, if your forwards can get their hands through and contribute in that respect, then the likes of Ringrose and Henshaw, they get the opportunity to play. But, you know, that's predicated on the usual things of your set piece functioning. And let's be honest, the set piece, the scrum has come on in leaps and bounds in the last 6 months. And the line-out, you know, for all the reasons I think that Birch has pointed out, has been great. And once you have confidence to play off a platform like that, then it opens up all other opportunities for you.
If Herring is the future, Birch, is Casey the future? And if so, does he merit keeping his place on the bench?
Kelleher the future, yeah.
If Casey, but Craig Casey, does Craig Casey merit keeping his place on the bench?
Yeah, look, I think Craig's brilliant. I think he's a breath of fresh air. You know, he sent back to play for his province last week. If Murray's fit, I think Farrell will go with Murray and Gibson Park.
Do you?
Maybe,
Christ,
maybe not Murray starting. Maybe not Murray starting. Maybe Gibson Park starting this week. If he wants to play high tempo, as Donal said, that'll tell us a lot about how we want to play against them. I actually think he'll go with Murray to start, to be honest, to Gibson Park on the bench. And I think Casey would then miss out. But I don't think. Look, as long as Craig keeps getting game time and keeps showing what he can do, he will eventually, you know, get an opportunity to start and see how he goes. So I wouldn't say Farrell leaving Casey out this week. If he does, is the end of him. I just think that you know, he just has to be a bit more patient.
Could somebody tell me the last time Conor Murray put in a decent, good, standout performance for Munster or for Ireland? I can't remember the last time. I can't remember it, like, genuinely. And I think this weekend, if we're saying, look, you know, I know that Casey only got 16 minutes off the bench. I understand that. He played for Munster last weekend. But Wes, you know, when is the time to make the transition, to back the young guys coming through, to give them the experience? And Casey, even with, I noticed several former internationals say the zippy attitude he came in, the pace that he brings to the game, you know, the passing, the little cheeky little breaks. That's exactly what we should be looking for. I just think if we go back to Conor Murray, I'd say it's a huge amount about our ambition.
I don't think Conor Murray's been terrible by any means. He maybe hasn't hit the heights he was hitting 2-3 years ago, but I could understand that rationale if he was 33 or 4. But, like, you're talking about a guy 29, 30 that was
hasn't played well in 3 years.
The best or the second best scrum half in the world for the majority of the last.
He was 5 years ago. He was 5 years ago, Wes. Not he hasn't played well.
Five might be pushing it now. 3 years ago, maybe.
No. 4 years at least.
And I think there's a contrast with him and Gibson Park or Casey in the approach both can bring. Whereas if you go with Gibson Park and it's not really, and you're looking to bring tempo and it's not quite working, well, I mean, Casey's more of the same in a less experienced version. So I'd be with Birch. I wouldn't see a step back I wouldn't see going to Conor as a retrograde step at all.
Yeah. I think Hugh, you're a bit harsh on Conor Murray and his performances in the November period. I thought he had certainly approached where he was 2 or 3 years ago. I also think there's a huge difference, and I'm all for the likes of Casey and these guys getting game time, coming in off the bench. But as we've seen, it's a totally different dynamic starting. Even, you know, the likes of Ben Healy, who'd been doing so well off the bench for Munster. He's had a couple of games, you know, with Munster recently where, you know, he struggled to find the same rhythm. All of a sudden, even Craig Casey starting, no, you know, the opposition know who you are. They know what your strengths are. They put more pressure on you. So there is a learning curve for these guys. I think it's brilliant that Casey has been involved. Personally, I'd love to see him kept on the bench, but it's not the end of the world if he misses out in this one. He's taken the first key steps. He has a battle on his hands. I mean, himself and Murray will be fighting for that number 9 jersey in Munster for certainly the next season or two. So, you're going to need both of them on top of their game.
Would you say, Donal, Ben Healy has no chance of playing consistently well rugby with that haircut that he has at the moment? I mean, fairness.
I don't know where these all this thing where you're kind of shaving half in the middle now, like it's all or nothing. I notice it must be something to do with Super Rugby. Every fella I've seen in the Southern Hemisphere is that particular haircut at the moment.
Yeah. Either that or the hairdressers aren't what they used to be. I don't know. We'll make up our minds.
Maybe you have to pay them in installments or something. I don't know.
Right. England against France, Birch, is going to be a cracker. I can't wait for it. I think a lot of people expect England to have a reaction against France this weekend because they haven't played well really since the World Cup. But I mean, expecting them to go at some stage sometimes can be quite dangerous. Do you think they'll put it up to France this weekend?
Yeah, I think they would. I think when they lost the first game, Eddie Jones came out and said, look, we have to fix our attack. It's broken, and it's probably very hard for them to fix it while they're winning games, which they have been winning games or had been winning games in 2020, even though they weren't impressive. And I think the fact they've lost 2, they will open it up. He obviously hasn't pulled or taken the knife out to his squad because there's guys like Sam Simmons and Marcus Smith, etc., playing very well in the Premiership that haven't been added. So it's the same group of players. I think, look, the biggest issue for him has been, I said at the start, is the Saracens fellas are, obviously out of form. But like, would you discard Makavunapola? Do you discard Owen Farrell? Do you discard Maritoji? I don't think you do. I think you just got to be patient and see that they're still going to be around for the next World Cup. And there's a lot of things off the field, reasons off the field why maybe they're having this dip.
But you know what, Perch, didn't they lose to Cornish Pirates last weekend, the Saracens? I think they lost. Was it the Cornish Pirates? So, and we've spoken on the podcast, about the difference.
It was a very good Cornish Pirates team now, Hugh. You're being disparaging again.
Yeah, some real titans of industry in that team. But we've spoken about this before, about the difference in standard, the jump in standard coming from your club game to international level is huge. Now, if you take that back another 50% into the lower division of English rugby, coming from that standard to international standard, maybe does Eddie Jones not have to get rid of those guys on a temporary basis? Say, look, you're not playing at the standard I need, so you're not the guys I need.
No, because he already made that decision. He made that decision here. It's nothing to do with the standard of the championship because effectively he made the championship hadn't started, so effectively he decided to ring fence those guys. Only Billy Vunipola played 1 game against Ealing in a kind of a made up cup because he needs game time. The rest of the lads didn't play at all, so he made that decision. And obviously now post Six Nations, they'll go back to the championship for I think 5 games, and then it's over. And look, maybe they won't go up. If they don't go up, obviously he's going to have to make a call. But I think if they don't go up, all those players won't stay in Saracens next year. They'll move to the Premiership clubs. So I just think the fact that they were so reliant on those Saracens players, the fact they had no game time, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff happened. Like a lot of those marquee players left Saracens. It must be very difficult, that environment. A club that had such stability to now be up in up in the air, will he go back up, etc. So, and the human side of things does affect players' form. So I just think, but I also think he's right to stick with the guys I mentioned. Maybe Elliot Daly might drop out, this week, and we look at someone like Max Malins or whatever, or move Anthony Johnson the fullback, and Anthony Watson the fullback. It's going to be really interesting how they play, because they actually played some decent stuff against Wales. And also France, how are they going to bounce back from 11 players haven't had COVID, And Arthur Vincent, he's still not well enough to play. It's not a simple. Basically, you're starting off again for both teams, I think. Well, particularly France, you're starting off again to see where they're going to be with such a disruption to their squad.
And that's an interesting point about COVID as well, Wes, because just to draw a comparison with Liverpool briefly, I know they suffered 3 or 4 positive COVID tests early in the season, and you can make a serious argument that Liverpool have struggled with those players that have come back, and those players themselves haven't really hit the heights of last season. Now, that might be something to do with the way the side is playing, but you just don't know how players are going to react to this COVID, and it affects different players differently. And I don't know. It'll be interesting to see France this weekend. Who they pick first of all, and can they get back to the heights that they hit in the first couple of rounds?
Yeah, I suppose Salah was the one that was talked about with Liverpool, that you don't quite get that last 1 or 2% in terms of conditioning, and it's hard to recover it. And we've heard a lot of talk about that. But look, I don't know the answer to that. Is the bottom line. But I suppose with the Saris, like one, I'd love to see France win because, well, they're playing England for a start.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'd love to see their progress continue and see them develop into the team that we all think they can be. With the England guys, you would think that that Saracens core, like I'd agree with Bert, you would have thought that by the end of the championship they would have come up to pace, because it's not like they're inexperienced players. I mean, but I suppose just moving away from that game slightly, is there's probably a core of 4 or 5 guys there, Saracens players, that are, like, in reality they're kind of generational players at club and country level. And they also would have been mainstays, I'm sure, penciled in as definite starters for Warren Gatland. And they go back to a championship now, potentially for another 2 months before a Lions tour. And there's certainly no wiggle room to try and get them to pace quickly for, this alleged truncated 4-game test series that might come in June or July. So it's the repercussions of the Saracens thing on so many levels have been massive. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping France can continue where they left off the last day. But like you'd say, there's not a lot of continuity there with COVID stuff. But equally, they made, 13 changes the last time they went to Twickenham, and it took England extra time to beat them. So it's very hard to call.
The only person who doesn't seem affected at all by Saracens, of the Saracens players, Donal, is Maro Itoje. I'm guessing you could put Maro Itoje in the Greystones J3s for 6 months and he'd still be able to turn out for England and do his stuff. He's an unbelievable athlete.
He's an unbelievable player. Obviously, there's an issue around his discipline at the moment. 5 penalties. England gave away 14 against Wales. He was responsible for 5 of them. And no matter how good you are, some of the penalties he gave away were borderline. I think the problem for Itoje now is referees are talking about him. He plays on the edge all the time. He's always looking to put pressure on scrum-halves from base of rucks. Is he onside? Is he offside? He plays right on the edge, and now he's generated this focus on him. So I think he just has to take a step backwards. And I've no doubt Eddie Jones will have had a word with him now, because he's just attracting too much attention. I do fear that those Saracens guys may hit the ground running in the next week or two, given the amount of games they've played. But that said, collectively, England, they look as if the zip has gone out of them. They look as if the energy is just not there. And, I suppose you get to a World Cup final, you play the rugby of your life, you beat New Zealand in a semi-final in the manner they did, to get comprehensively beaten in the final. I don't know, is the psychological damage from that still sort of hovering around England, but they've been consistently below the level that we expect from them now for a long time. They were like that right throughout the autumn. So I suppose the imponderable for next weekend is, can France, France had all the momentum after beating Ireland in Dublin. They now will have 4 weeks without a game. Have they lost that momentum going into this match? I think the COVID issue is a huge one. How does it affect them physically? I think the only 2 players that have been ruled out are Uno Antonio, the prop, and Arthur Vincent. Okay. Now, the plus they have is, since the last game, Vakatawa was back for Racing 92 last weekend and apparently played really well. And Galtier looks as if he's ready to pick him. He doesn't even have to drop anyone now, because Vincent is out of the team. So he brings him straight in. Also, Enigmatic played for Toulouse last weekend. Mm-hmm. So they were a crucial part of their side throughout the championship last year and in the autumn. So all of a sudden, you get those 2. Now, personally, I think Jalabert has been outstanding. So you're spoiled with the riches you have there. But Vakatawa could be a game changer. It's a question. There's also a bit of talk, and Bert, you're normally our French correspondent. You know everything that's going on in across the channel. But apparently, the players were really pissed off with Galtier in terms of the way he broke the bubble. And, and we all know they went for their waffles in Italy and all that. But taking that aside, they've been under so much of a strict regime in terms of the way they've had to conduct themselves over the past few weeks and months. Galtée lay down the law when, we've been talking about this project about indiscipline of the French in the past. We're not putting up with this anymore. Yet when it came to losing the momentum, the Scotland game being cancelled, he was the one where all the focus has come on. So it'll be interesting to see, what the dynamic is within the group as a result of that. I'm with Wes in that I think France, the rugby they've played, I'd love to see them continue that against England on Saturday. I think also it'll help the Irish cause if France beat England, because then England have won from 4 coming to Dublin, and they're really on their knees. So I'm really looking forward to that game, and especially I hope he picks Vakatawa, because he just brings something different.
When Donal Lenihan goes, when the French rugby players go to Rome and let loose for the morning and break the bubble, they go looking for fancy Italian waffles. When Donal Lenihan gets loose in Rome, he goes looking for bacon, egg and sausage in the morning. That's the cultural difference between the Irish and the French, but so be it. Do you think that Enigmatic could play a 12, Birch, this weekend, with Vakatawa coming back, and accommodate both Jalibert and Enigmatic and have two playmakers for France?
No, I don't think so. I think I'd like to see him stick with Jalibert. I agree with Donal. He's a super talented player. In France, they feel Enigmatic is more of a game manager, so he's the safer choice. Now, he has lots of flair as well and lots of ability, but Jalibert has really taken this opportunity that he's got through Enigmatic's injury to come in and really impress. So the selection there is going to be really interesting. I would say that Vakatawa in, you got to bring Vakatawa back in and play him with Fiku. I mean, you've got 2 unbelievably powerful centers there, and Dulan can step up as a second playmaker. Like they're all very comfortable on the ball. I don't think there's probably, they need to be like us where we want Joey Carby and Sexton, etc., or England with Farrell forward. I think they can get the ball to wider channels far easier than maybe the rest of the Six Nations teams are. I think just a huge game. Just going back on that, there is definitely rumors of discontent in France around Galtée and his arrogance and his disrespect for the rules, and also the fact that they threw the preparator physic, they threw a fitness coach under the bus as being COVID zero when the players knew he wasn't, and it was that what actually caused it to get out about Galtée, because someone in the playing squad leaked it, and there's a rumor that Bernard Laporte warned the players if there's any more leaks, none of them will play for France in the World Cup.
Wow, Jesus! They
want to close it down. So, but Galtée, this has been Galtier's issue. Galtée is a genius. But in Montpellier and Toulon, there was a feeling that he felt he was better than the players, and he prioritized his own individual gigs rather than the team stuff. So I think it's pretty important for him that they get a performance this weekend and just get back on track, because they were absolutely cruising and had momentum. And if they mess it up because of not sticking to the protocols, it'd be just so French.
This is just brilliantly French. Like, they've assembled the best, most talented coaching squad there has ever been. They're getting the players to play absolutely brilliantly, and their own infighting could bring the whole house of cards.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's
I have to
classic.
say, sorry, I'm shattered having just thought I topped the French correspondent with my little bit of knowledge about Galtée. He's got in under all the rocks.
Allegedly.
He's got all the stories. Oh,
No.
Jesus.
Allegedly, Donal. Allegedly.
Oh, it'd be brilliant. It'd be so French. It'd be so typically French. Right, we'll wait and see. Speaking of the French, Wes, nice handy ones for Munster and Leinster in our Champions Cup draw. Munster, Toulouse, and Leinster, Toulon. I suppose Toulon not the force of old, but still two very difficult ties for the 2 Irish provinces, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant run of fixtures now with the last 2 rounds, and then the France-Scotland game in the Six Nations leading into a Pro 14 final, and then, at least 1 round in Europe, maybe 2. I'd fancy Leinster strongly against Toulon. Toulouse would be, like, it's the kind of one where over the last, or I suppose it's happened twice in the last 10 years, they've played quarterfinals against Munster, but it's the kind of one where the home crowd has kind of tipped it in Munster's favour a little bit, but obviously that's not going to be such an issue this time around. So, it's a tough tie. It's mouth-watering one, though. Really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and Donal, as Wes said, like the block of the next 6 weeks of rugby is just, if you're a rugby fan at all, it's dream stuff, isn't it?
It's brilliant. I mean, I was thinking, oh God, obviously we're in a bit of a fortunate position. We're getting to see some rugby live. Thinking, oh God, like Ireland, England, Six Nations, what have we got after that? And following weekend, you have Munster, Leinster. Then you have those quarterfinals last 16 in Europe. And they are mouth-watering clashes. It's just a pity, that the Thomond factor that Wes is talking about, like that Toulouse team. And given that they've so many guys like Cyril Boy and Marchand in the French front row, they have so many guys back on the French team now, whereas they had drifted for the past 5 or 6 years. Certainly those quarterfinals, Munster put a huge amount of points on them. They were nowhere near the Toulouse teams that we had come to love and admire, and certainly see Munster and Leinster play so many times over the previous 10, 15 years. That's going to be a brilliant game. Having the likes of Colby, you'll have Dupont and Enigmatic at halfback. Likewise, like Leinster, Toulon certainly not as good as they were, but like they have Serin and Carbonell at halfback. Ebonet's a bit up front, but they're more sort of individual talents thrown together. They haven't been back where they were. I mean, the guy who must be paying the fella pulling the balls out of the tube is Raj. I mean, La Rochelle have got this absolutely brilliant draw. I mean, they could go the whole way to the semi-final. So that'll be interesting to watch. But that said, if you take it, if Munster, I think Leinster will beat Toulon. Munster, that's going to be a very difficult game. But you look at what lies beyond that. Leinster will probably have to go to Sandy Park to play against Exeter, who are the reigning champions. So that'll be fascinating. I think Exeter will want to prove, that they're sort of winning the Champions Cup last year wasn't a flash in the pan. And you'd have Munster, having already beaten Claremont in the Marcel Michelin this year, may have to go back there again. I mean, they play Wasps away. Now, as we've seen, Claremont aren't the team they were, but still they have incredible individual talent. But to think Munster, I mean, what a game that was when they beat them, oh God, about 3 or 4 months ago now. But to think that they'd have to go back there in the same tournament to beat them again is fascinating. So look, I think to be fair to EPCR, with rounds 3 and 4 having to be cancelled and no room to replay them, I think they've actually, the job they've done in redrawing the tournament has actually worked quite well. So let's give them a bit of credit for once.
Absolutely, because it was a mess there for a while. Just on Toulon, Birch, I mean, like, are they still a strong side? I've just gone through their last few results. I mean, they're still well capable of putting up victories and stuff. It won't be a walkover for Leinster by any means.
No, but they are a pale comparison to the side that are winning European Cups with Backy's Boat and Matt Gitto, etc. I watched them a couple of weeks ago. They lost to Bayonne at home, which would be a big shock. Yeah, they are a team of individuals, and Patrice Collazo, who actually was in La Rochelle before John O'Gibbs and Raj went in there, the former Gloucester prop. He's trying to implement his style. It just hasn't really hit yet, or sunk in. They've lots of talent, Gabin Villiers on the wing, some really good foreign players. So they are talented, but I don't think they shouldn't be at the Leinster the level of Leinster yet. What's interesting for me is the Pro 14 final now. I mean, for Stuart Lancaster and Leo Cullen, their selection for that is going to be really interesting, because the second string and the third string have been phenomenal. And there's very little, actually, I don't think there's a huge difference between Leinster's first choice and second choice. And given that the fact that most of the first choice players are going to probably play against Scotland and against France, and then the Pro 14 finals the week after, then Toulon's the week after that. I wonder. And like, in fairness, I thought it'll go full strength, but because there's been rest periods in the Six Nations, there's been the round 3 and round 4, which was cancelled. So they haven't played a huge amount of rugby. The problem is what they have to play that's in front of them could be week to week. So, and I think Munster have to go full strength because Munster need to win it. So it's going to be really interesting to see.
Where do you think Leo Cullen will prioritise progression in Europe and getting over the line in Europe versus a title, a Pro 14 title? If he had to prioritise one game,
no, it has to be Europe.
Doesn't it have to be
Leinster
Europe?
Leinster have to be back.
Yeah.
If they want to really look at this period of 3 or 4 years, back in 10 years' time as a squad, they have to see themselves as being up there, winning European Cups. I think.
Yeah.
I think so. I think they've shown week in, week out that they're the best team in the Pro 14 over the course in a league format, and they've been pretty good at winning the finals as well. But I think they would sacrifice. They would never want to sacrifice. But if you had to sacrifice losing a final of a Pro 14 to win a European Cup, I think it has to be the priority now.
I think just on that, when you think about it, like that Leinster team that played in Ulster the other night, I mean, their forwards were outstanding, really outstanding. Like you're talking about a second row of Fardy and Devin Toner, a back row, Rhys Ruddock, who we keep talking about here, Josh van der Fleer could be in the Irish team next week, Penny at number 8. Like you could slap Jack Conan in there, or Caelan Doris could well be back. I mean, they have such an embarrassment of riches. When you're talking about a squad and a panel, what better incentive for the likes of Lancaster and Leo Cullen to turn around to those 8 forwards now and say, right, lads, I trust you. I'm going to play you against Munster in the final in 2 or 3 weeks' time. You deserve to be there. You're the group that got us to this stage. I think what a message, what a statement that would make for the Leinster squad. It would also, in another way, put even more pressure on Munster, because Munster, you can take it as read, Munster will be going bald-headed for this final. So therefore, the likes of Peter Manny, CJ Stander, Dave Kilcoyne, they'll all be flooded straight back into the team. So, what a statement that for Leinster, the opportunity of resting a full Ireland pack and going out and win that. But I agree 100% with Bert. Europe has to be their priority. I'd say they were seething with the manner in which they were beaten by Saracens last year. The fact that Saracens didn't even go on to win the thing afterwards. But listen, isn't it brilliant? As we say, what a 3 or 4 weeks of rugby we have post Six Nations at a time when we thought we mightn't have any rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a quick word, when you mentioned Ulster, Wes, your man, Robert Ballacool, played very well against Leinster at the weekend. There were a couple of standout performances from both the Interpros as well. But there seems to be a bit of excitement about Ulster, about this guy Ballacool. Do you think he's on the long finger potentially for an Irish squad, or is that a little bit rushed?
I wouldn't have thought so a year or two ago. I suppose when he first came up from the sevens, he was very slight and he obviously had ability, but he's definitely improved, and you can see the difference in his physique. And I suppose it's like last weekend's games, it probably because it was in the middle of the Six Nations and because there was players released back, it probably got the attention amongst the public back on the Pro 14 in a way that it hadn't been since maybe the games in August when rugby first came back. So I think Ballacool and probably Gavin Thornbury were the guys that most benefited. And it was funny just listening to Donal talk about Itoje earlier, and nothing revolutionary about it, but I mean, great players or great teams in any sport tend to kind of almost change the way positions are played. And if you look at that level of pressure Itoje puts on around the ruck and puts on nines, it's not that it wasn't done before, but it seems to almost becoming a defined skill set that lots of second rows are starting to try to add to their game, and it makes sense obviously with their size and their wingspan in terms of blocking kicks and things like that. But Gavin Thornbury certainly looked like he'd taken a leaf out of that book at the weekend.
Equally as well, I remember what Itoje did to Scotland, Donal, and it was a Klein who played for Scotland. I can't. Who was the scrum half?
Ali Price.
Price. It was Price.
Right from the start of the game.
Got an awful time. He got an awful time from Itoje, but equally as well. So teams are going to have to adapt to what those kind of second rows are putting pressure on. They're going to have to protect their scrum halves more, aren't they?
Well, that's what they were doing with this snake thing, where you had 2 or 3 fellas lined up, and which I think is appalling.
Yes, right.
You know what I mean? But
Brian Hickey wouldn't go for that, no.
Brian Hickey wouldn't go for that.
I thought you were going to say we had enough snakes in Cork.
You're just getting paranoid now at this stage, Donal. It's crazy.
Yeah, but I mean, look, it's trends, isn't it? It's amazing. I find it fascinating, that one fella does something, and obviously Itoje has been brilliant at that. You look at the latest trend now, it was out of the game. It was always there when I played rugby a long time ago, but the tap and go penalty 5 meters out is so much back in vogue, brought in by Cowan Dickey with Exeter. Now everybody is doing it. Nobody is, when you have that position. And just on that, I'm digressing slightly. This whole thing, like you look at Leinster, obviously fantastic the last day, but all 5 tries were scored by forwards. Like, this whole thing now about playing territory, getting within that 5 meter line and the pick and jam, there's so much of time taken up with this. I know you can score in rugby in 100 different ways, but do you think, Birch, that the whole sort of latching on, how do you defend? I mean, Ian Madigan at one stage was defending in the pillar position with about 45 stone coming at him. You've no chance.
Yeah, Donal, I'm glad you brought it up. I actually find it incredibly boring to watch. And I know there's a big focus on how long it takes for the start of a whistle for a scrum to be set, etc. But I actually think, at least with a scrum, there might be a bit of excitement when the scrum happens. When teams get into that 5 meter channel, particularly teams like Leinster, who are so belligerent that they don't go to width. They just back themselves to score, and they'll go 25 phases. And even lately, even with advantage, they haven't pulled a trigger to go wide, because I think they see it as they take enjoyment in terms of demoralizing the opposition. And the problem is, when you go to width, and Ulster did this a couple of times, when you go to width, even on an advantage, and if you don't score, the defense get a breather, right? And you have to start all over again. So what Leinster have been doing is just keeping it in there. And invariably, to stop it, you have to give away a penalty, because you have to creep up, or you have to stay the wrong side, because as they come with the latch, it's very difficult to get out of there because they're pre-bound. So look, it's a very effective way of scoring, and coaches will play to the laws there. But I think from a spectacle point of view, it's just, unless someone knocks it on, which generally doesn't happen because they're all doing it in their own time, it's nearly impossible to get the ball back. And Ulster, in fairness, were much more physical in the second half. But Leinster just ground, and eventually they scored. And fair play to Leinster, they're good at getting into those positions. But I think from a law point of view and a spectacle point of view, it's not ideal. And again, I would say the guy who takes that quick tap, from a penalty point of view, I mean, that's a suicidal thing to do, like what James Tracy does for Leinster, what Cowan Dickey does, because effectively there's no, it's you with 2 latchers against technically 8. After that, at least a couple of guys are on the ground. But it's not pleasant, and I don't know how the law makers can take it out of the game. And it's one of those trends that now is in, and coaches and players will keep using it until it doesn't become effective. And it's hard to see how it won't.
Sorry, Hugh.
Yeah.
Just on that there, when Bernard's talking about the lawmakers maybe having a responsibility in that situation, I don't know what the 2 lads think, but I've like, rugby was always quite a stop-start game by comparison with some other sports, but I think the new breakdown laws are the umpteenth case in the last number of years in terms of law tweaks where there's been more unintended consequences than what the actual plan was. And I think to an average spectator, I think the game has become so stop-start now with penalties at the breakdown, either defending or attacking penalties. I think when you combine that with this kind of pick and jam scenario close to the opposition line, and when the lads have both used the word trends umpteen times in the last couple of sentences, and it's, I saw Peter Stringer doing a piece prior to Munster Connacht the other night on TV where he highlighted kicking into the backfield in the space that's between 2 defenders back there, because the 9 isn't covering the backfield typically anymore. And to watch the game after that, you would have thought Stringer was clairvoyant, because it happened so many times exactly what he looked at. And the point I'm making is that a lot of coaching seems to be driven by trends rather than innovation. And if kind of slavish adherence to trends coupled with a couple of follies in terms of lawmaking, like combined, like it's a massively diluting effect on the spectacle and the excitement of the sport.
Yeah. Wesley, I agree with you. And to be honest, the coaches who are copying the trends, they won't catch Leinster, for example, or they won't catch Toulouse, because they have more talent anyway, and they're already, so they're going to be better at it. I would say the problem at the moment is, the laws are actually fine, but teams know that.
Do you think the breakdown law is fine?
No, but I'm talking about that pick and go stuff from 5 yards out. Just to go back to my point, the referees are only really looking at the defensive team there, right? So that's what you see. Penalty advantage. It's always against the defensive team for creeping up the ruck or not rolling away or no arms tackle, etc. Players, the attacking team know referees are very rarely ping them for sealing off, right? Which you could, right? You move that type of tactic further up the field with 30 seconds to go or a minute to go, where a team tries to wind down the clock with constant pick and goes. The referee will then more than likely penalise the attacking team for sealing off. That's why teams are very careful around how many rucks they play to wind the clock down, because they know it's more the referee will have in his head they're trying to wind down the clock. So I think it's just a case of if the referees were really strict. I'm not trying to blame referees here, but just at the moment they focus on the defensive side only 5 yards out. I think if they actually were more careful around the sealing off, which happens all the time, the cleaning past, opening up the gate, etc. If they start to ping that a little bit, it would actually make it more. The trend would be you have to actually look to where the space is more so than just constantly picking and going.
But yet the referees seem to be paying no attention to the defensive side when they're defending further out the field in terms of policing an offside line.
Yeah, that's true. And Rob Carney's comments as well during the week about the difference he's found almost straight away since moving down in the pace of the game, the tempo of the game, and the skills required to play the game in the Southern Hemisphere versus what he's left in the Northern Hemisphere. We'll come back to this maybe another time because it's we're almost out of time for this weekend. All right, lads, but finally, just predictions this weekend. England, France. Wes, are you going to go for a French win and Scotland, Ireland as well? How do you see that one, just quickly?
Ireland and France, and no more talk of Meghan and Harry is my hopeful prediction for the weekend.
Poor Piers Morgan. Go on, Donal.
Yeah, I think I'm going for 3 away wins. I don't think it's ever happened in the Six Nations where you've had 3 away wins in the one weekend. So therefore I'm looking at France, Ireland, and Wales to win. Right.
Okay. Yeah. Is it mad that we could go into the final weekend in the Six Nations and Wales are going for the Grand Slam? Jesus. Bernard, give us your predictions.
I'll go Ireland, England, Wales.
Okay, good stuff. Lads, pleasure as always. Thanks so much for your company. Enjoy the weekend's rugby. We're back next week.